I think, firstly, a very formal welcome to the Rise World Summit. Most of you are probably attending it for the first time. And we definitely hope it's not going to be your last, because this is our 9th year and next year is going to be our 10th year. So very, very excited about it already and thinking about it. So I do hope you already received my formal invitation for next year. The Rise World Summit is truly one of a kind. And we are going to be having, as Deepak mentioned, we have already 3,600 people registered from 54 countries. But in over 100 hours of programming, we have no panels and no presentations. Every format has been literally thought through to make it as interactive as possible, as participatory as possible. And so truly unique experience. And I hope that you will feel that change and difference in today's conversation as well. The theme for this year is innovation and diversity. And the reason is very simple, that we really want everybody to think about not diversity and inclusion, because that's the norm and it's more of compliance, but to think of it as innovation and diversity as a driver for growth. So I'm going to really stop here very quickly because I know we have a lot to learn from some really special people who have joined us today. And so Shashi, I'm going to hand it over to you as the moderator of this session to really introduce our opening address speaker and get started with the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. What we are going to do, we have one national policymaker, 5 entrepreneurs, 7 educators, 5 practitioners, 5 policy influencers, 5 researchers, and 8 media persons. That's 38 people, but basically that's 38 brains, right? Like, but there are not 38 people with different skills and different backgrounds putting their heads together on this platform. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Chaitanya Prasad. He's a national policymaker, and he's an officer on special duty at the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting with the Government of India. He's also the Additional Director General News at Doordarshan News and DD India. Those are the government-funded platforms of national, initially terrestrial television and now satellite television network. He's also the Additional Director General at the Directorate of Film Festivals and the Festival Director at the famous International Film Festival of India, IFFI, that's held annually in Goa. It is a real pleasure to have Chaitanya in our midst, and we normally would not even call bureaucrats by their first name, but this is who he is. He was so willing and ready to join us. He immediately recognized not only the importance of what we are talking about, but in general, that's who he is. He's genial. He's always a pleasure to talk to, and he's always a fountainhead of ideas, as I have known him. Whenever he speaks, and I'm like taking notes when he speaks. So without further ado, may I request Chaitanya to deliver his opening address? Already shaking his head. I don't know what is.
Yeah. Good evening. Good morning. Namaskar. Well, that was a very long introduction given by Shashi. I am not aware of such an introduction being given to me. Yes, I work for the government and I participate as a policymaker in communication and happen to handle a few portfolios. So that's the long and short as far as I'm concerned in my career. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, because it's a pleasure and privilege to be in this August gathering of diverse people with diverse skill sets, and it would definitely be a learning curve as far as I'm concerned. Now, I work in the government, that's straight and square. And where communication is a very critical component as to how do we enhance outreach to the people, how do we enhance our visibility, how do we reach out on policies and programs. So all that put together as far as the government's approach to the whole communication process. Now, as far as this topic was concerned, infodemic and media literacy and the challenges as far as policymakers is concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are existing in very challenging times. I think nowhere and at no point of time has communication been the centerpiece of all action. I'm sure all of you would agree to that, for the simple reason that, unfortunately, due to these successive waves of the pandemic, wave 1, 2, and 3, suddenly communication is center stage. And because communication is center stage, we have seen this paradigm shift taking place within the different verticals of communication, the way communication is being handled, the way communication navigates through truths, untruths, whatever you may call it. So if I would say, as far as the strategy, concept, and process, it has undergone a change. There are shifts and changes which have taken place, and there is a change which is visible at different levels. So if you are talking about the communication architecture, I think we are in a state of a kind of a fragility has set in for us, because we are not very strong as far as the foundation, for the simple reason that changes are taking place as and when it has happened through the successive waves of the pandemic. Now, what I want to say is that as a result, we've had new challenges, we have new opportunities, and more importantly, new nomenclatures. And why I say new nomenclatures, for the simple reason, we talk about the idea of an infodemic, right? Now, everyone talks about the infodemic and everyone dissects it, analyzes it the way you perceive it, whether it's a policymaker or it's a recipient or a common man or a common person or the community. So how do you react to an infodemic, number one? Then there is disinfodemic. Then what I see, this is my personal view, is that there is definitely a kind of a communication fatigue that is coming in. So when there is a communication fatigue coming in, you're talking about an infodemic and you're talking about media literacy. How do you handle this? So when this thing comes into play, I have thought about it, and that's where I'm placing it for the first time into this August audience, is that I feel we are all suffering from what I would call a communication indigestion. We all know how indigestion takes place in a human body. So there is absolutely communication indigestion taking place for the simple reason that we are being subjected to ideas, concept, content, tools, the flow of information, etc. So when all this happens and we talk about infodemic and media literacy, how do we react? My personal view is that the answer to all, there's no silver bullet to it. Absolutely. And I'm sure all of you do agree. There is no one single solution to the whole process. Now, what would you like us to do, or as a policymaker? I think we need to be innovative, extremely important. You see, you have to think out of the box. So one is innovation. The second most important thing, irrespective of where you belong to, which terrain or which ecosystem, you have to be adaptive. You have to be adaptive. There is no running away from that. Third is there has to be a transformative attitude within the individual, whether it's a policymaker, whether it's a recipient, whether it's a person who's designing the content, etc. And there has to be a transitionary phase. That's very, very important. And that's what we have witnessed as far as the pandemic is concerned. 3 different waves across the world. So these are the 4 things that I thought I would flag. Also, when I was preparing for this roundtable, I came out with I wouldn't say it's a perfect idea. You can debate, you can laugh it off, you think that you can take it forward as far as a discussion is concerned. I defined 5 R's of communication. 5 R's are the alphabet. Reconfigure, rethink, I said reconfigure, I said rethink, I said redesign, rediscover, and reimagine. So the 5 R's of communication: reconfigure, rethink, redesign, rediscover, and reimagine. Now, these 5 R's, if you put in the whole matrix or the ecosystem as far as communication is concerned, I think we would be able to address to a very great extent the idea of media literacy as far as an infodemic is concerned. Now, what is important in this whole debate on infodemic and media literacy is that the misinformation that we are all battling with as of today is much worse than the virus, because it moves into the institutional process, it moves within the psyche of an individual, and what is more important is that it is dependent on, there is this kind of algorithmic movement where technology, ideas all merge and they infiltrate into the human thought process, or they infiltrate into the human system. And mind you, what is very critical, which communication is looking into today, is the kind of business module that prevails. I'm sure people across the globe where it's much more evident, technology, systems, perceptions all merge. Now, how do you take this thing forward? And what is very important is, as a result of this, the infodemic becomes a little different in the sense that it has a multiple, kind of a multiple variant as far as it is what it is trying to convey. And the impact is very simple. The impact is on the common man, because a common man or a common person who is expected to be media literate, the purpose is, how do you become media literate? I should have critical powers of thinking. It means also being attuned to the digital wave that I am subjected to. That's very, very important. So I have a policy, I have a business model, I have a communication process. Now, how am I going to weave it together? And more importantly, what is happening today is, because of the multiple sources of information that we are all seeing, what is the verification process that we have? That is very, very critical. And the verification process varies from country to country, from society to society, because in some places, the verification process is very focused. At some areas, the verification process, unfortunately, is not well adapted, you see. So what is important is, we need to be very clear as far as the collaborative process is concerned. You see, the collaborative process, the cohesion, the collaboration between different stakeholders. So then only I personally feel that this idea of media literacy can definitely be taken forward. It has to be taken to a logical end. So what we need to do is build circuits, segments of, I would say, information modules, or you could call training aspects, capacity building, etc. And what we need to do very effectively is prevent the kind of misuse of technology. I mean, unfortunately, in India, that's where I'm speaking from, Delhi, very critical is the fact that there is a movement, there is a chain on the splurge of information. And I'm sure wherever you are, whichever part of the globe you are belonging to, WhatsApp has been the new monster. I would say it's a monster for the simple reason it moves in a certain direction and expects everyone to follow that direction. And everyone joins this bandwagon, which the impact of it is not felt. And within the government, what we've tried to do is we have tried to put filters, etc., to do it. And we've been fairly successful. But it has been a very, very challenging task to do it. Now, what happens, and just a couple of more minutes, because of this kind of movement and this kind of multi-variation that comes in, you see the social cohesion that is expected. After all, when you communicate, you expect a kind of a cohesive unit to emerge as far as the communication process is concerned, because we are being subjected to multiple sources of ideas, multiple content. Now, how do we bring everything together? So that social cohesion is very, very critical. And what is very important is the multi-sectoral participation. Why I'm not trying to be very abstract here. In communication, what is important is it cannot be done by the government alone. There has to be a kind of an integration between different kind of stakeholders. Everyone has to understand their responsibility, whether it is an entrepreneur, whether it is a policymaker, whether it is a journalist fraternity, as well as the kind of the community that is the recipient of this deluge as far as information is concerned. And what is very important here is that when we talk about media literacy and infodemic, what we need to understand is that the terrain of media, the landscape of media is changing every day. You see, and there is a traditional balance and battle that is happening between print media, social media. Now, where is the median between all this? That is very, very critical. Now, how do you bring about a kind of a balance between these kind of opportunities? And more importantly, I feel that when we put this whole process into practice, you see, we have to keep into account the societal good. We have to keep into account the social context in which it is operating. We need to take into account the interests of the people. That is very important, because everything, whether it is information literacy, whether it is media literacy, it reflects as far as the entire society is concerned, because eventually there are a lot of consumers as far as content and consumption of different media variations are concerned. That's one. So challenges as far as the information ecosystem is concerned, before I end, just a couple of points. So what are the challenges for media literacy? Let's be very upfront, because we've given a background. The infodemic has come in. We've given a space as to how it is operating, how it is destroying the institutional processes and systems and impacting individuals as they are existing. First of all, we have to beat the digital divide. That's very, very important. You see, everywhere in the world, everyone is not equal. Everyone is not tech savvy. The Gen Next is definitely much savvy as far as even I am concerned, or many of us, because the young generation, 5, 6, 7, they just know how to take the whole process forward. Linkages of the information system with, I would say, technology, very, very important, so that the bare minimum can be understood by people at large. The combating of disinformation, where you have fact check units, you have fake news. That is another thing which has come up. That's a phenomenon which perhaps we will discuss. And what is very important is the learnings that come into play. That's very, very important. This whole design of media literacy and infodemic, what is very critical, ladies and gentlemen, is our ability and the power to innovate and adapt. That is very important as far as content is concerned, whether it is tools, whether it is outreach, etc. And that is very important. And people have to be kept as a centerpiece, you see, as a center stage. That is very important. And when we talk about people, we should not talk in terms of cliches or jargons, etc. The common understanding which a common person has, because when he has a level of understanding, I represent, for example, I work for the public broadcaster. Even in this race of quick and instant news, which is there globally, and we are no exceptions to the rule, people come back. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, people do come back to the public broadcaster to get what is authentic and what is correct factual news. And that is what we try to do as far as the pandemic is concerned, designing new innovations, addressing the concerns of the people, trying to give them definite information which helps them fight the infodemic. Now, before I end, I would just say that it's very challenging. It's extremely important that every element or every vertical or every stakeholder gets together to define very correctively and cohesively as to what is media literacy. And what we need to do is to go step by step. We cannot expect the moon. We need to take small baby steps as far as the whole process is concerned. And then with the passage of time, set a template, see how we are progressing. And more importantly, what are the best practices? That's very, very important. Whether it comes from the community, whether it comes from civil society, whether it comes from government, there is this collation of best practices that comes into play so that people are able to understand the challenges of media literacy, the way innovation is taken forward, and how the different tools and the mechanisms are put in place to fight this infodemic. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, ladies and gentlemen.
Great.
Thank you so much. And Karen, did you want to say anything?
Just very quickly on the format, Shashi, if you don't mind, just 2 minutes more.
So let me just formally thank Chaitanya, and then I'll hand it over to you. Chaitanya, this was like wonderful. I was, I've taken 5 pages of notes, and it's still incomplete because the rich diversity of what you said. I loved the concept of innovating and adapting, because that's what the pandemic has taught us, and we all went into it blind, like nobody knew this was going to hit us, and therefore it's been a learning process for governments, for societies, and for individuals, and of course for media literacy practitioners. I really thank you very much for that enlightening and thought-provoking opening address. I'm sure that a lot of what we are going to discuss will also circle around some of the points that you made. Thank you so much. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Shashi. And thank you so much, Chaitanya. I think I echo Shashi's words, so I will not say it again. But I will say that, just as he took five pages of notes, I kept the chat box running. So I would definitely request people to keep an eye on the chat box, use it really, really effectively. Believe me, this is the only medium in which you can have parallel conversation and nobody's going to tell you, shh. right? So go for it, use it, and make the maximum of any facility that helps you, right? I just wanted to really say, as I mentioned a little earlier about the format, because it is truly a unique format that we follow. So just to kind of maybe explain that a little bit, we as we said, no panels, no presentations, and so instead what we do is really a rich conversation. So while we have our experts here who are going to, of course, guide the entire conversation, we are very happy to have the outer ring and others who are here with us to keep posting your thoughts and ideas and comments and feedback. Also, those who are in the inner circle cannot use the Q&A, which is why we have the two circles. So the Q&A can only be used by the outer circle of people. Please use it, and I would request the experts to please use that as well as a medium to respond to them, because this is an opportunity for you to also kind of respond to people's questions directly, quickly, and multiple people can respond to that question as well. We want to really keep things buzzing with a high energy over here. So do use every facility that you can. Last but not the least is, again, here, people tell me 2 hours, nobody likes webinars of 2 hours, they will tune off. But honestly, every single roundtable of ours has gone overtime. Every single, and it's only because we have capped it at 10 to 15 minutes that we have actually stayed there. Otherwise, we can easily take it for another half an hour, 1 hour, without a doubt. And the one just before this previous one, we actually went 25 minutes over time, right? So in the interest of time, also, we don't have introductions, per se, of everybody. So instead, please use the chat box, introduce yourself really quickly. And for our experts, as you speak, we will put in your profile and information about you in the chat box as well, right? But right now, I'd request everybody else to also please just quickly introduce yourself in there. That's your chance for letting others know who you are and what is this table looking like right now. Last but not the least is the format, which we call the 3C methodology, where we actually start talking. And Chaitanya, you exactly said that, start with the challenges, right? What are the challenges? Because it's only when we focus on the challenges that we can actually emerge with new kinds of solutions and look at different perspectives and evolving solutions. So this is the format that we will follow: challenges, capabilities, and then collaboration. And it's not that it's a watertight compartment, but my request to all the speakers and experts and everybody else in the room is keep thinking about these three things. What are your challenges? What are the kind of solutions, strategies, interventions, innovations that you have? And last but not the least is the opportunities for collaboration, because the Rise World Summit is not about the event. It is about what you're going to do after that event. So there's a lot of outcomes you want to take forward, and hopefully look for collaboration and ideas that can be built on from here. With that, I'm done. Shashi, promise not to disturb you again. But with that, I'm going to hand it over into your safe hands to take this further. Over to you, Shashi.
When Karen and I were talking several months ago, we discussed how media in some form must be included in this year as a theme for this year's event. And this is a result of that. Her colleagues, Ashwini Kumar and Deepak Nanda, and I then brainstormed some more before arriving at today's roundtable theme: Infodemic and Media Literacy, the Problem Before Policymakers. I thank them, and I thank them personally as well, the entire organization and support organizations of Rise World Summit 2022, and of course, Karen Shaiva, Ashwini Kumar, Deepak Nanda, and their teams for this important roundtable. Not the least because media literacy is introduced for the first time at this prestigious event, and that takes media literacy in a different framework than we are usually used to. We are viewing media literacy in that framework of RISE, which most of us might know, but for those who are not aware, that's basically responsible, inclusive, sustainable, eco-friendly. So you will see that all these roundtables and such, they're all based on these themes. And if we situate media literacy like that in terms of how responsible and inclusive behavior or communication, it sets a precedent for future dialogues, taking stock, benchmarking, recommending ways ahead. forward. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to set the context. We're going to talk about challenges. We're going to talk about capabilities, collaborations, benchmarking. And then we will also talk about the need for a media literacy policy, which we don't have in India, for example, whether we even need it, and whether in that case, what shape should such a policy take. So look at the exciting possibilities before us in this session. I want to recognize the experts with us tonight or today. I'll have to keep saying that each time, don't I? Like tonight, today, whatever, wherever you are. Do read their full profiles in the chat box as they speak, of course, and as Karon said, the limitation will be that we will only mention verbally. What I will do is I'll simply recognize them. Dr. Belina Diabru is a global literacy educator based in the USA. She's the president of the prestigious International Council for Media Literacy, earlier and probably still better known by its previous name, National Telemedia Council. Welcome, Belina. Belina served on the UNESCO forums, and she's written copiously on media literacy. So that's the perspective she's going to bring in. Frank Baker, he has observed the growth of media literacy in the US, not just in the US. Now he conducts workshops worldwide, and especially for media literacy trainers. He also runs a media clearinghouse. That's his platform. Publishes material related to media literacy. So seeped in media literacy, Frank is. He's written several books. And that's the kind of rich combination that Frank brings to our forum today or tonight. Govindraj Etiraj is based in Mumbai. He was one of the early spotters of the problem of misinformation in India, and therefore of the need for media literacy. So he went on to found. So what do entrepreneurs do? He just went on to found the data journalism platform India Spend. And then later, the fact check platform, Boom Live. He's a well-known journalist. I mean, most of us in India would know him as the founding editor-in-chief of Bloomberg TV in India, and a very familiar face on CNBC India before that. So Govind's approach to media literacy practice from those angles would be very, very important. I'm waiting to hear them. Malminderjit Singh, or Mal, as he's popularly known, he comes from a slightly different background. He's held senior media positions, including lately as an editor at Channel News Asia in Singapore on the digital side. But he's also worked with legacy chambers of commerce and the Singapore government, and now with Hume Brophy. So he can tie together media, agency, corporate approaches. And that's what I'm looking forward to from Mal. Syed Nazakat is a Ramnath Goenka Award-winning journalist. He's reported from a mere 30 countries. He founded Data Leads, which does independent journalism, collaborates with Google, more lately, I think, with BBC on media literacy training and so forth. Again, he comes from that combination that holds several forms of expertise, including training. He today joins us from New Delhi. We have several special experts whom I personally, Karon, call disruptors, because they bring in very special and very focused perspectives into this conversation, and their input is going to be invaluable to our discussion. Starting with, again, alphabetically, Anjana Krishnan is with the Asian College of Journalism. She is a researcher there. Also, the India coordinator and writer for the Reuters Oxford University Digital Media Survey and Report. The India report, the India part of the report actually came out for the first time last year, and she's doing all that coordination. Bhavna Pathak is with the Prestige Institute of Management and Research in Indore in India. She is deeply interested in the practice of media literacy at community levels. And I know her personally, and I know she's deeply, always constantly thinking about how to implement media literacy at the grassroots level. So it's going to be very interesting to listen to how she defines media literacy and what issues are cropping up. Ebru Bodur is a media researcher and a historian at the Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. She's also a Turkey expert, and she's going to share a little bit about that in time to come. George Abraham is an international consultant in education, clean energy, bunch of other domains that I won't even go into because I can't finish. He's very good to have with us as a mind that thinks in collaborative terms. He's always thinking like that, and I know him to do that. So it's great to have George in our midst. Heba Kandil comes to us from the UK. She's a Middle East, North Africa expert, but really she does media development / empowerment activities as a senior member from the Thomson Reuters Foundation, where she works. So she approaches media literacy from that media development, training, empowerment kind of perspective. It's a great perspective to have. Welcome, Heba. My name is Shashidhar Nanjundaya. I'm the moderator. I come from a combination of media practice and education. So before I don't know, we were talking a little earlier about fatigue. So should I go on and introduce media literacy, or should I just get into the act and get Govind to do the honors for us? I'm wondering. Maybe I'll just get into it a little later. But what I really wanted to say was that although media literacy itself has enjoyed several decades of existence, it's very paradoxical. Chaitanya mentioned this as well. Infodemic, we are talking about media literacy as a solution, but I see conflicts, contradictions, and paradoxes, and I will flag about 6 of them, but I think I'll flag them as we go along rather than right now. So, well, actually, let me start with Dr. Belina Diabru, because she comes in from that conceptual perspective. So, Belina, welcome to the session again. Can you tie up some of the concepts of media literacy as you see it, because you belong to literally the oldest media literacy organization in the US. So you know a thing or two about the concept, maybe the evolution of it.
So I think, first off, thank you for having me. And I have to say, after listening to the opening speaker, I'm sitting here feeling a little overwhelmed because I want to say so many different things. As you were speaking, I was writing notes and thinking, I really want to interject and say something, but I think this is a wonderful opportunity to have these conversations. What I will say is, let me start with the term infodemic. I know that we're starting with that piece, and I worry about that term quite a bit because it sounds like media literacy has become an inoculation to the issues that we're seeing in the world. And I think that's putting too much emphasis into a literacy that really hasn't taken a foundational hold within schools or communities and so forth. With that being said, I will say that on a grander scale, there has been a shift. We have definitely, especially in the United States, the discussion of media literacy is now prevalent. However, it's not conceptually the way I think it originated. And so let me backtrack then historically and say that the work that is done in the United States has been based quite a bit on what was done in the UK with the media education work, and with the Canadians in particular, with the work that they have done within their own curriculum and so forth, and our counterparts in Spain and Australia all contributed to the dialogue of media literacy education since the 1960s here in the United States. It has evolved. I'm not sure that it has evolved well. I think we've had opportunities where the essence of media literacy has taken hold because of the problems in the world. So for example, in 2016, when our election was happening in the United States and everybody was talking about fake news, then we started talking about media literacy. And yet media literacy has been an ongoing conversation probably for over 40 years prior. And the acknowledgement of that sort of didn't have even a place in the portal of the current conversations until fake news. So even my work that I've been doing for so long has acknowledgement now when I say, oh, it's the fake news piece, and now everybody understands what I do. Whereas before that, nobody understood what media literacy was. And so it's been obfuscated by different reasons and different forms. Another example of this would be when, we were talking about digital technologies, and I think there is an awareness that digital technologies have always had a massive influence, but then media literacy got caught up in the digital citizenship realm, in the protectionist realm. We're going to protect students from all the things that are going on online. And I think that has actually what took hold with the policymakers in the United States, and I think worldwide. I was actually at a World Summit in Sweden in 2010, and that's when media literacy was being discussed mostly in terms of, this digital, we've had digital change. And digital change in 2010 certainly looks very different now from 2022. So there's been an evolution of technologies and the speed and the algorithm. And we can talk about all the things that have come along with that have added to the conceptual problem of where we're in. I know one of the questions, when I think about practice here in the United States, it's complicated. There are places that it exists in and not well. And there are actual schools that I think who have taken on this initiative and really worked really hard to put it into place. We have a number of organizations and corporations who have put money into this. Yet the thing that has always bothered me, and this is someone who I'm a practitioner, I'm a researcher, I'm an author. I work with schools, I work in the schools, and I work at universities. Most of the time, the people who are not sitting at the table are educators. And a lot of policy is imposed on educators, which is incredibly problematic because then they don't take it on as work that they really should be doing. And right now there's a group that's pushing policy state to state, so let me also say, we don't have a national curriculum in the United States. We have something called the Common Core, but not every state follows the Common Core. And so states have a determination about what it is that they want to cover or not cover. So I always find it interesting. I always see this list that goes up about, media literacy has been pushed through legislation in this state or that state, but it looks literally nothing the same from state to state. It is very individualized. It depends on who's sitting at the table and who's making recommendations. And most recently, the Aspen Institute in the United States put out a report that spoke about media literacy. They want to fund it. And as I'm looking through the back, and I had this very amusing moment with it because I was sent an email to ask who I thought should be in the room and what issues we should be facing. And I highlighted that the two people that are really important to be there would be community leaders like librarians and people who are in education. And the report comes out and there's not one educator that's sitting there or one librarian. And the recommendations are all about what should be put and imposed on education and libraries. And that to me is, I'll be honest and say, I find it insulting in many ways because education in this country, especially right now, is very difficult. We are still in the middle of a pandemic. We are recovering from 2 years of students being in and out of school. And if you talk to the average educator in the United States, they would tell you that we are about 2 years behind academically with students right now. And we're trying to catch up. So when now the next round of conversation comes in about, what can we put into schools? Most teachers want to put their hand up and say, we're not ready yet. We're still trying to do the basics of literacy. And yet around us are all the issues that were just previously discussed of the misinformation, the disinformation, the infodemic piece, which has been taken on a lot by the World Health Organization, in part because there has been a lack of understanding of how to use information to communicate to the general public. This was something that came up a year ago. I was sitting on a WHO panel, and I actually said, I feel like, people in the health industry need classes in media literacy education. So there's a lot to be said about how we are communicating and the lack of communication. But I also feel like we are not looking at the everyday person. There is much more to this concept of media literacy education that we need to address in the community, because they're the ones who are sitting with the end result of the things that have been imposed. And I'll one more thing, because I know I only have about a minute left. I don't think we're getting good information from our media. We are in the opposite thing where we are at, we have 24-hour news cycles, but they're not 24-hour news cycles. They are 23 hours probably of opinion news, and maybe, if we're lucky, an hour worth of news. And that has created a problem because people can't differentiate between opinion and news. I do think our news media, that is newspapers, online sources, are better, but the problem is we have to get people to be reading those sources and not watching, and actually following that. And that has created a divide between people as well, because who watches what changes the dynamic of what you perceive as happening around the world. So I think that might be a bigger answer to the question, and there's so much to unpack within that, but I will leave you with that.
Thank you so much for your insights. And I have to say that much of what you said in terms of the involvement of communities and community leaders, educators, that will remain one of the stumbling blocks in many a country. And I think that it's important at this stage to flag that, to make sure that there is participation at that policymaking level, and so forth. But there's just so many other points that you made. Thank you so much, Belina. We'll come back to you, of course, with more. I want to go to Frank. And Frank, if in a few minutes, if you would share how you see media literacy right now working in the US. Is it working?
Great question. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and good evening. I'm so happy that there are policymakers here listening and taking notes. I've been to India, spent a little time there, spent a week at a school in Mumbai with teachers and students, and it was extremely rewarding, and I look forward to an invitation to return. Let me start, if I could, Sashi, with a story. I worked in broadcasting, and then I left broadcasting and joined the public school system in Orlando, Florida, 1987. And I'll give you the context. And one of my responsibilities was to purchase films and videos that all the schools would use. So that got me very close to curriculum. What are we supposed to teach students? What are they supposed to learn? After being in the position for about a year, I asked for permission. Could I leave the building and go and sit in some classrooms and watch these teachers using these materials, right? So I'm sitting in the back of the classrooms, I'm taking notes. I come back to the office, I'm writing this report for the superintendent of the Orange County Public School System, 15th largest in the United States at the time that I left. I was frustrated. I didn't see one teacher engage students in any critical viewing skills. Now I'm going to stop and ask every one of you listening to me right now to write down that phrase, critical viewing skills. Where does it exist today in what you teach, what you want students to learn? It does not exist. That's one of my issues. I didn't see any teacher introduce vocabulary that students might hear in the film or the video. I didn't see a teacher say, oh, be sure to notice the visual on the screen when they talk about symbiosis. We're going to talk about that image. And I didn't see one teacher at the end of that week ask students at the end of the video or the film for any understanding, any post-viewing questions. So as a media educator, I'm always asking what's missing, what is not there. And media literacy is missing from our, if you want to call it, national curriculum, which Belina has astutely already made a reference to. And I wanted to tell you, in 1999, after attending a national media literacy conference, I said, we need to look at all 50 states' teaching standards and determine where media literacy is represented. And we published a piece in Education Week, the newspaper of record for American education. What did we find? We found the media literacy was strongest in the English language arts, in the social studies, which some of you call history, and we found it strongest in health. Wonderful, wonderful. But then Common Core came around, which Belina also referenced. Common Core is now the law in 42 states. And who was the driving force behind Common Core? Belina said she looked at the credits to this report. I looked at who was behind the driving force of Common Core. Testing people and textbook people, driving forces, okay? So now we have 42 states that have adopted Common Core, and there is no media literacy in Common Core. 42 states are not teaching Common Core. And my colleague Richard Beach and I wrote in Education Week, and if you'll excuse me, I'm going to read it verbatim. Here's what we said. Other than a mention of the need to, quote, evaluate information from multiple oral, visual, or multimodal sources, end quote, there is no specific reference in the common standards to critical analysis and production of film, television, advertising, radio, news, music, popular culture, video games, media mixes, and so on, nor is there explicit attention on fostering critical analysis of media messages and representations. So media literacy is also not tested. And most teachers in the United States are going to teach only what is on the test. How unfortunate. Since I did study all 50 state standards, I will tell you there is one state that does not follow Common Core, and it's the state of Texas. And I want to tell you how Texas represents media literacy. Media literacy is represented under reading. And if I were to give guidance, if the Ministry of Education engaged me and said, how do we get media literacy? In reading. We want to teach the reading of a media text. Here's what Texas says. For example, evaluate the role of media in focusing attention on events and informing opinions on issues. That's excellent. Secondly, interpret how visual and sound techniques, for example, special effects, camera angles, lighting, music, influence the media message. Here's another quote. Evaluate various ways media influences and informs audiences. Belina made a reference to an effort in the United States to get media literacy passed in all 50 states, and that effort moves forward. But I don't know of any state that's passed a law that says what Texas says. Those efforts right now are behind news literacy or digital literacy. They're not really media literacy. And so that's my worry. So there's no specific standards. So teachers enter the classroom. They don't get any media literacy in their colleges of education. If I was in India, I think I might survey colleges of education. Are the teachers exiting colleges of education getting any media literacy? I know that India has a long, thousands-year history of teaching critical thinking. My definition of media literacy, when I created my website, the Media Literacy Clearinghouse, my definition was applying critical thinking to media messages. Pure and simple, applying critical thinking to media messages. So every workshop that I do with teachers, I start with the question to these teachers, what is media literacy? I don't want you to go out to the internet and look for an official definition. I want to know in your own words, what do you think media literacy means? And for the most part, they don't know what it means. And that has already shown up in some of the research. So we have to come up with a common understanding. What are we talking about? I'm an educator. Belina is an educator. We are interested in educating teachers and educating students. I can tell you that media literacy, again, strongest in the English language arts. So we're talking here about non-print text. We're talking about author bias. We're talking about argument, techniques of persuasion. In the history arena, we're making a reference in the United States to the rise of media in history, political messages, propaganda, primary sources. In health, an area where I find media literacy to be extremely strong, there are references to, what are the influences of food choices, alcohol and tobacco advertising, body image, violent and sexual media messages. Those are arenas that are addressed in many United States health classrooms. And
Right.
I think that that's really extremely important. I know that we today we do a lot of testing using computers, yet we don't put a visual media, a commercial or a film clip on those computers and ask students to analyze those. So there's a huge disconnect in what we are teaching young people today and what
Right.
the young people are being exposed to in their world. In fact, schools in many places are afraid of social media.
Okay.
They are afraid of YouTube. They don't want to go there. I do want to say this because your broadcasting community is represented. And this one you may want to write down. There is a media owner in the United States entitled Tegna, Tegna. Tegna owns about 55 or 60 television stations around the United States. And their stations now broadcast a regular segment called Verify. So if you go to YouTube and you look up Tegna, Tegna, and Verify, you will see that individual television stations in the Tegna group are broadcasting Verify segments to their audiences.
Okay.
I would
in
really
the
like
interest of time, if you would,
Yes.
if you'd like to sum up your argument right now.
Well, it's not really an argument. It's an observation. And the observation is teachers are leaving the colleges of education without having any media literacy training whatsoever, and for the most part. They're entering classrooms where media literacy is not required to be taught. And so that is problematic. I am frequently in school libraries and I scan the bookshelves. I've been doing this for 25 years. Where are the books for young people about media? The media is the world in which they pay attention to, but I find very few books there. So we have our work cut out for us. And I would just close by saying for 10 years now, I've been writing a blog at middleweb.com. middleweb.com. And I look at the popular culture and I look at news and I try to make the connection to media literacy. So I urge your audience to look at my writings there. Thank you,
It's
Sasha.
already there on the. Thank you so much, Frank. So many points there, and we'll go over them. And I'm sure that from that perspective of how it's working as practice at the educational level, this was pure gold. Thank you very much for that perspective, Frank. And sorry to cut you off. I mean, it's just that we are now taking short monologues from everybody, and then we will have a short discussion. I want to now come to Govindraj Etiraj, our India expert in the way that media literacy is being practiced, but I'm not sure that he agrees with the actual word media literacy as far as his own practice is concerned. Govind, today we are first of all, is media literacy over invested in misinformation? That's one question I keep asking myself. But Govind, to you, we live in a media finds me world, right? I mean, the exposure to media is very incidental these days. It's not like it's organic. So because that's why we say we are bombarded with information. We don't have to seek it out. So arguably the distinctions between information, opinion, Belina alluded to this, they're all blurred. Can you shed light on the main issues with media literacy in the Indian context? What are the stumbling blocks that, for example, you might be facing in the delivery system?
Shashi, thank you so much, and to the foundation for inviting me. So the way we were set up, I mean, some of us were set up, and as you mentioned, entrepreneurially, is really in response to a problem. Similarly, I think our understanding of the concept of media literacy is really a response to what we think is the diagnosis or the symptom of the problem. The problem clearly is that there is disinformation, which is organized, and there is misinformation, which could be inadvertent, and that is now spread far and wide in society, not just in India, but in many other parts of the world. But in India, it takes on a certain dimension, and let me explain that a little bit. So if you look at the number of internet users today in India, it's roughly about 600 million, majority of which are on smartphones, or rather smartphones are the entry point for the internet in India. In India, smartphone equals internet equals WhatsApp. which, as you know, is a very important tool or platform for spreading information as well as unfortunately misinformation. Now, of these 600 million, roughly 300 million people would have come online only in the last 4 or 5 years. So you're really saying that, and if you look at the demographics of India, it's a very young country. More than 60% will be under 21. Now, almost half the people who are online today were barely 13 or 14 years just 5 years ago, right? And these are maybe in their 20s today. So we have a unique problem. We have people who are accessing the internet for the first time. Now, I'm not saying that it's only the young people who are. There are a lot of older people who are also accessing the internet for the first time. But it's really a majority of young people for whom really the concept of maybe what is true and not is not so clear in the context of in the context of digital platforms and information delivery on digital platforms, or the term perhaps people would use for that is digital literacy. So rather than saying media literacy, which could be a little, let's say, discriminatory in a way, I think digital literacy sort of, at least from my point of view, sort of defines the problem, which is that people who consume digitally but are not aware that what they're consuming is true or not. And that may not have been the case if it was a physical world. So a large proportion of the population is obviously being exposed to misinformation or disinformation. Now, I like to look at this as a demand and a supply problem. Right? We've touched upon the demand side. I think the speakers before me defined the demand side quite well. On the supply side, I think there is an important issue to remember and to keep in mind. I think when we talk about areas like health, then perhaps we are talking about more inadvertent distribution of misinformation. Though it's not necessary, it's always inadvertent. If you look at the anti-vaxxer campaigns, for example, it's a very, it's very, let's say, designed and it's an architected and designed dissemination. But when it comes to misinformation or disinformation around politics, around political parties, around communities, groups, then it's a different world. We definitely are seeing, and this is across the world. I'm not for a moment saying this is only in India. We're definitely seeing far more architected and and carefully, let's say, constructed, almost military-industrial complexes of disinformation. Now, and that changes the game somewhat, because we're talking about a problem on the demand side, which has been defined, but exacerbated by a problem on the supply side, because it's so large and such big and operates at such scale that any demand side response is not easy to do. So now, what could be the demand side response? No, I feel the government has an equal stake in this problem. I mean, in many countries, the government may also be a source of the problem because governments, particularly when they're politically elected, may benefit from, let's say, being silent in some areas, if not actively allowing certain kinds of information to spread. But if I were to look ahead, I think if the government does not invest in building a trust-based society, and trust I'm using as a larger term, which could lead to media literacy, digital literacy, and so on, stands to lose. Because eventually, if people stop believing anything or mistrusting anything that comes from anywhere, whether it's the government of the day, whether it's people who work for government, or it's journalists like me, and as you know, mainstream media's biggest crisis today is the fact that most people don't believe it. And again, that's a global phenomenon. So trust is if we have to build trust on the demand side, whether it's with young students and children or with older people. By the way, we run workshops and training classrooms for both segments, young children as well as old people. So the government has to work on it. Now, what those courses can be and how they can be done, I think we've heard Frank talk about it. I think there are good models to look at. There are a couple of interesting models in India too. The state of Kerala, we've seen some very interesting innovations, but those have been driven by individuals, I feel, and similarly in other parts of the country, members of law enforcement, civil services, civil servants. But I feel those are more individual initiatives, not a sort of concerted and focused effort. But equally, I would not blame the government completely, whether it's in India or elsewhere, because I think the problem is new. I pointed out in the beginning that this is a symptom that we are seeing too suddenly. This has happened only in the last 4 or 5 years. We didn't know what the problem was, and therefore we didn't think of media literacy as a solution. So we are responding to it today. I would only urge that those involved on the demand side, which is whether it's educators, government, policymakers, should now hasten to find solutions at scale, so that particularly the young generation, as they grow up, develop a keen sense of understanding what is the internet, what does the internet contain, how can I use the internet, or how should I not use the internet. And as they do that, I think some of the challenges that we face thanks to misinformation or disinformation will also be addressed. So I'm going to pause there. Thank you so much, Shashi.
Thank you so much, Govind. So much to chew over, especially in terms of the trust-based society. I think it's a terrific point that you raise, and especially given that we are only responding to a problem, media literacy, or any, even fact-check portal, independent journalists dropping off the mainstream and then starting to do something that they believe is the building of a trust-based society. Thank you very much for that, Govind. I want to come to Mal now, because uh, Malvinderjit Singh is he comes from that perspective of, he straddles between the journalistic world and the corporate world, and I want to understand also, because he comes from the digital world, as social media users have become sources, for example, for news. They're also setting the agendas. They're the new gatekeepers of news. Mal, what are the pros and cons? Take it away if you could, please.
Thanks, Shashi. Well, I think firstly, social media has changed the whole concept of gatekeepers of media. And I think that's happened through two ways, really. One is that it's increased the number of gatekeepers. So we no longer have just one or two gatekeepers. And the second is that it has also changed the whole process, or diluted the whole process of what each of them gatekeeps. So let me elaborate. So in the past, traditional platforms of media dissemination really were mainstream media, right? So news channels, radio channels, and newspapers and magazines and stuff like that. So what did happen was that the gatekeepers really were the people who reported the news. So these were your reporters or journalists. And of course, you had also your news agencies, so your wires, like the people who actually gave the news, media companies, the news. So these were gatekeepers. And of course, the media companies themselves and the news editors were also additional gatekeepers in terms of what they then disseminated. But what social media has done is that it's added on extra layers of gatekeepers. So now not only are the news agencies, the journalists, and the news editors and the media companies themselves gatekeepers, but you also have the social media platforms, social media companies, so your Facebooks, your LinkedIns and Twitters and whatever not, as additional gatekeepers. And of course, your consumers, of the news itself, so your social media users, who are also additional gatekeepers. And this happens because these guys are now able to, by liking, sharing, or commenting on news stories on social media, they then also help to influence which stories are disseminated widely and which are not. So then they also become additional gatekeepers. But what of course has happened is that the process of gatekeeping has also changed. So in the old model, it was pretty much the gatekeepers had control over content generation, content development, as well as the content dissemination. So they decided what went into the news stories. They decided, because they control the platforms, whether it's the news, the television news channels, or the newspapers themselves, they controlled the dissemination as well. But now that's changed, because now really the news companies, the traditional media companies, only have control over the news generation or the content development really. When it comes to content dissemination, they really have lost a lot of their influence and power to social media. So social media companies, through their APIs and through their algorithms, now have a large amount of influence as to which news stories, and what kind of content gets more viral. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the consumers themselves, the social media users themselves, also have huge amount of influence in terms of what is consumed and what becomes more viral than the other. So as a result, traditional media companies now have less influence over the virality of news stories. So that has created a very complex gatekeeping environment. So you have now a lot more new players into the whole mix, and a lot more dilution of what were the traditional roles of gatekeepers. So that's both, has both pros and cons. The pros, of course, is as people often talk about, is that social media has democratized the idea of what information is and what information goes out. So of course that's a good thing, but that also assumes then that everyone who is part of the democratic process, whether the social media platforms or the consumers themselves, have a good understanding and are very much advocates and purveyors of media literacy themselves. But that, as we know, is not the case. So therefore, where we do see is that disinformation then becomes a lot stronger. And of course, I mean, the traditional perspective also is that it's not too good to have too much power in terms of gatekeeping with the regular media companies. But that, of course, also has got its pros and cons, because in countries where there is a huge regulation of the media sector, media space, then there is also a high level of accountability in terms of what goes out. Sure, it's not the accurate picture, but there is a level of accountability in terms of making sure that what goes out passes a certain amount of litmus tests in terms of
Right.
getting that credibility and that authenticity in. Yeah, so I'll stop there and we can discuss further.
Right. Mal, thank you so much for that perspective, because I think from the media's perspective, how that puts us in that entire framework of how the media themselves are grappling with this emergence of social media as a part of the process, and what implications that might have, for example, for media literacy. Syed Nazakat, let me come to you, because in fact, when Frank was talking about the delivery systems at the academic levels, I was thinking of you, because I know what you do has a lot to do with with training in India, but at a different level, right? I mean, do you, for example, believe that there should be a more systematic or a national kind of approach to what we do? Take it away, Nazakat.
No, thank you so much, and really pleasure to be here, and I'm really enjoying the conversation here. I think there are different ways of incorporating media literacy, information literacy into our society at different levels. I don't think the solution is that everything should be a national or international or global. Maybe as a country, like I live in India, so we have so many different languages, then we see a lot of things work better in local languages with local context. If you try to adopt something global here, that may not really work in so many different ways. Let me start with a story, actually, because I think that may capture a couple of things what we are trying to do here. It was 2015. We brought 20 doctors and journalists together in one room. And the aim was essentially to understand whether journalists and doctors will collaborate to improve the health communication, fact-checking, verification of content about vaccines, about different diseases and all. And it was an attempt to see whether collaboration can work also between different people who really do not usually work together as a units. And to our surprise, the doctors were there, journalists were there in the room, and at 8:30 in the morning, they stayed for that full day as a workshop. It was our first boot camp in 2015, much before COVID, much before all what we are hearing today, the medical misinformation or vaccine misinformation. And we took that all across Asia to more than 17 Asian countries actually over the years. And in the whole process, we adopted, learned, and then saw a lot of things happening back home here in India as well. So 2 years ago, we started a program with the help of Internews and other partners supported by the Google called FactShaler, which was essentially a media literacy program in which through an open application, we selected 250 professors and media editors, journalists and all from different parts of the country, 28 states. And then through a proper training, through a training program, they went back to different communities. And in the last 2 years, it has been transformational change the way that whole network has built and worked with different partners, including with the state governments, including with more than 50 community radio stations across the country. And today it's one of the biggest media literacy initiatives in the world. So I think everything has to evolve and looking at the local context. And I completely agree with what Govind said earlier as well. We're still learning how to deal with internet. Half of India is on internet. And in the next 5 years or 4 years, we will see the rest of half also coming on internet. And most of these people are first-time users of information. And they really do not know how to separate fact from the fiction. What is critical thinking, essentially, as Frank also mentioned, how to really critically assess information. What is the difference between fact, opinion, and news? And a lot of people absolutely have no idea. They see anything on Facebook, they say they believe it. They get anything on WhatsApp, they really believe it. And it has real world consequences. It's not just like, you can say, it's not just a fun, actually. We have seen a video which was circulated from Pakistan and which reached India. It led to mob lynching in India. More than 20 people died because of that video, which was not even related to India. And I think for the first time, the biggest challenge, and I can conclude here shortly because I know it's quite late, already getting, we're on a time consumption. I think our biggest challenge is for the first time in the human history, we are producing more information than we're able to consume, every one of us. And that really, creates a challenge because there's so much information available that we are not really able to process it, understand it, read it well. And I think it certainly has a solution, and solution is education. And it's not really the responsibility of, I can say, media to just be there and teach and train and others. I think it has to be a whole society approach. The governments have to take a lead. You can't scale anything without government support. And we have seen in India, for example, a state like Kerala, for example, they decided to have a 10-point agenda by the chief minister of the state in which the media literacy is one of the key areas. We were there just, I think, one back, and we led a workshop for 200 professors, how they can go back and train graduate students in higher education across the state. So I think there's a lot of learning from each other, and I really believe that there's a huge space for collaboration. There is a huge need for the state to come forward and invest more resources into media literacy in countries like India, where we still do not, in other countries as well, where we really do not have so much discussion about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Those are very, very clear articulations of how delivery systems cannot necessarily work one way or the other, and it has to be a largely collaborative effort from different sectors. That is something also that Chaitanya had invoked earlier, and I'm really glad that that some of the states in India have started taking the initiative on media literacy. I want to get a completely fresh perspective. This is where our disruptive number one comes in, because I thought that it was very interesting how Govind mentioned trust in media and so forth. We have one special expert who's actually worked exactly on that. If I can bring in Anjana Krishnan here. The only thing is, can we hear you, Anjana? Let me check. Your audio wasn't working last time we checked.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, very much. Thank you. Please take it away.
Yeah. Um, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. I'm supposed to be a disruptor, but somehow I seem to be agreeing with most of the points that have been made so far. But specifically talking about trust and perhaps contextualizing it from the study that we did with the Reuters Institute, there are a few points that I think be essential to be made. One being that, of course, I think most of the panelists have brought up this point that increasingly the younger audience seem to be looking at, seem to be consuming information, particularly news, through distributed platforms, which goes to show that they're actually exposed to diverse sources of information and news. But at the same time, when it comes to when it comes to understanding trust in the kind of information that they consume, the survey tried to understand this through a couple of ways. One would be to understand the general trust in news that audiences consume, right? And the trust in the news that they specifically consume by looking at specific sources and accessing them. And of course, trust in news brands in the country. But here, I would just like to concentrate on the first two aspects. It was found, particularly from the results from the survey, it was found that India generally has a very low level of trust in news compared to the other 46 markets in which the study was done, which is that 38% of the population or the survey respondents trust in news in general. And this was, the numbers were pretty low, particularly among young particularly among the 18 to 24 years age band and the 24 to 35 years age band. But this again gets a little interesting, where while they generally did not trust news, they did trust the news that they choose to consume, which they choose to access and consume. So this is where I think the concept of media literacy becomes a little bit interesting, which is to say that how do they maybe we need to unpack this concept of trust here a little bit. What kind of media literacy do they have to actually trust the information that they're consuming, given that they are being bombarded with diverse sources of information? And this is where some of the points made by the other panelists becomes very, very interesting. Unless and until we start the concept of media literacy at a very young age, then how, if that's not done at a very young age, then how does it then impact trust, particularly of a younger audience for consumers in the country? That apart, I think trust here also, when I say it needs to be understood a little bit, I think a limitation of a survey of this nature is that it doesn't try to capture the qualitative aspects of determinants of trust, but I think that also has a very important way. For instance, I think in terms of trust, one also has to look at what has been the larger critical or general worldview the person consumes the news, or what has been their exposure to news or media in general over time. And also, I think there are other factors also that come into play, which is the socio-political and cultural factors in which they are situated, or the media ecosystem in general, which would then have an impact on how they look at trust. So I think these are very important points that need to be brought in when we are trying to understand trust and trying to contextualize it within media literacy. So I'll just stop there, and others, if they have a point.
Thank you, Anjana. I'm so sorry, everybody, that Anjana's audio, it wasn't as clear as it probably should have been. She was struggling with her with one device. She moved to another device, but it looks like we had some problems as well of more like static kind of thing. I'm so sorry for that, but the points were taken in that how and the limitations, of course, is that it's urban youth and the digital generation, how that trust in mainstream media is affected. I would like to come to our Thomson Reuters Foundation person right now, because I think she has some of these tied up as well, because she does this entire media development programs. She's been running them forever. Heba, if you would take it away from here, please.
Thank you, Shashi, and thank you, everyone. So far, it's been really enlightening. There's so much synergy from our practical experience at Thomson Reuters Foundation delivering media development and media for development to many countries, newsrooms, journalists in the global south. And we too have been moved from just basic journalism and trying to impact the media ecosystem and the information sphere through targeting what we call legacy media, young journalists and newsrooms all over, trying to strengthen their capabilities and their skill sets. But now, again, because we do want to produce more impact and grappling with the current challenges of where we are, and I know that I do appreciate media literacy has been around for 40 years plus, as many of your previous speakers have been saying, even before the infodemic. With the advent of and the growth and the super growth of social media and the disruption and the different amount of content creators, the loss of the traditional gatekeepers of legacy media, we have been confronted with one more challenge to address, and that is how to tackle misinformation and disinformation. And one of the ways is through, well, media literacy. And I do appreciate the two-pronged approaches of producers and consumers. And with the producers, in a way, just by reaffirming proper and solid journalism skills of fact-checking, editorial news judgment, sourcing, balance, that in effect is producing stronger, more coherent, more solid information that can stand and help sort of leave less room, less of a vacuum for copious amount of toxic manipulated information. So that's one of producers. But we've also tried to now widen the people and the target audience that we work with to include not just the legacy journalists, but also the prosumers, the influencers and the content creators who are both producing and consuming content in this sphere, in this brilliant democratization of information. We just realized one way is to sort of pitch to them, almost resell to them, the same fundamental values of good journalism. Again, sourcing, balance, fact-checking, critical thinking, to people who produce content, in effect to selling it to them to increase their standing as influencers, to play their part, their moral obligation of sort of becoming part of the solution, not problem, on a personal level, so that they do not get duped as well as consumers of different types of media. And we found that to be successful. Just next week, we are going to be in Dubai, training again in the same room, young Arab media leaders, journalists, as well as influencers and content creators who don't necessarily have not graduated from the professional journalism sphere. But that's just one way. And I agree with some of my previous speakers saying it's kind of, it's unfair to put the onus of solving misinformation in general on just media literacy and raising that. This is just a speck of a wider solution that definitely involves cross-sector and multi-stakeholders. And as one person was saying, to scale it at some point in time, governments and policymakers as well.
Hey, but thank you so much for that perspective. You come from that rich background of how to not only develop or help develop media content, but also empower people like influencers, for example, so that over a period of time, evolution, not revolution, is gonna really bring about solutions. It's a very, very rich, powerful perspective. Thank you very much for bringing that in. If I can come to you, George Abraham. George comes from a wide range of consultancy experience, and I go back to the concept of collaboration And I would like George to invoke that that concept for us, and then we will go and discuss that a little bit more. George? There you are. We can't hear you, George. I think you're on. I don't, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. So sorry about that. Yeah. To address that point of collaboration, Shashi, and to this very interesting panel of speakers, is definitely influenced from where I come from. That's a perspective, because I grew up in a number of countries, but my early years was in Africa. And I grew up in studying in different countries, traveling, and working with different organizations throughout my my time. And what I find, the example I would say in terms of perspective is the following. Typically, when you go into collaborations, what tends to happen is people only understand or look from where they come. They don't take time to understand where the other partner or potential collaborators that come into the mix. So if you want to really be successful in collaboration, you really got to understand the context of all the stakeholders and really have an alignment and of understanding of what you're trying to achieve, and to make sure that to achieve anything, you've got to be very, very clear of a timeline, that things don't happen immediately, and you've got to be prepared to unlearn quite a lot of where you come from. So let me give you this example of when I traveled on a holiday to Africa, and I was doing a safari, and this driver was driving us, 6 of us in the family, through a game park, and he was pointing out little things in the yonder, and we couldn't see it, and we wondered why. It's because what I finally understood is he is so acclimatized to see the far and the near at a very quick pace. What we do is we only see what is immediately around us. So we don't engage in our conversations in collaboration, whether it's media literacy or in whatever we talk with people. That is what I feel is probably an important perspective to bring to this thing. So I'll end it there, and maybe others will, will sort of question me there.
It's a great way to end, because it begs so many questions, doesn't it? Like so I want to bring in Mal back here because he knows a thing or two about collaborations as well, and I know that Mal, you do this as well in your profession. So I want to before you begin, Mal, I want to bring in Meenal Jagtiani's question here, which is essentially the paradox of collaboration. Sometimes what happens with training, for example, right, is how media conglomerates who are themselves getting into training in media literacy, their business models themselves might be in conflict with that, because do social media platforms, for example, the conglomerates behind them, not actually kind of foster misinformation or disinformation, even in an unaware way, and it might be a genie out of the bottle right now. So does that really, I mean, do collaborations work as smoothly as we might think, is one question to probably also think about. Mal, if you can talk a little bit just for a couple of minutes about collaborations, please.
Thanks, Shashi. No, I think collaboration is definitely something we should explore. And, we've discussed today quite a bit about how the government, the civil society, and the education sector can be involved in media literacy. But I think one sector that we've tend to overlook over time and again is the private sector, and why companies and private companies and businesses can't also play a role. In fact, they should be expected to play a role as well. And I'll give you a very small example. I mean, today thought leadership is a big buzzword in the PR communications sphere, and that is both good and bad. Because because it's created a platform for business leaders to share their thoughts, but it's also become every average Joe on the street, every Tom, Dick, and Harry now positions himself as a thought leader, and that's created a lot of noise. So it's the onus is upon companies now to use these thought leadership platforms and opportunities to really dispel misinformation. And I can go on and give you more examples, but in the interest of time, I won't. But the point is that I think thought leaderships have been approached by companies more from a marketing, product, service, sales point of view. But I think they should look at it more also from a social responsibility point of view as to how they can then play a role in dispelling some of the misinformation out there, and they should be held to high standards for that.
Right. No. I completely hear you. I mean, the social responsibility is no longer, for example, in India, a government mandate that must be maintained. But we see around the world how corporations are trying to be more responsible in this. But again, as Minal pointed out, there are contradictions in that and probably some conflicts as well. I know that, so we want to shift gears now, and I want to bring in Bhavna Pathak, who's our special expert, but she has more, I think, of a question or a problem that she might want the experts to address. But I mean, we don't have to, but it's a challenge that she brings to the table. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir. So being a researcher, when I was, during my PhD, I found that media literacy is in a very nascent stage here in India. So thought like, forget about the curriculums and all those things. I mean, when we talk about the developing countries like India, the scenario is really very different from the developed nations, because in India, like 76% of the population is not in that formal education setting. While when we say that the penetration of internet is increasing and even the rural India is leading the urban India, in context of consuming the internet. So it's really very important for common man to become media literate. And it is really very important to realize that how harmful it is to become media illiterate. So I thought how, as an individual, I can contribute and can help people to become media literate. I'm talking about the people, like how we can carry the media literacy to the masses. And for that, I just initiated this. It's a very small mini step, you can say, media dictionary. It's audio-visual multilingual dictionary, where I thought like several media terms like infodemic, what is TRP, what is media manipulation, what is digital parenting. So such kind of thing, I first developed the videos in Hindi, and it was one man army show, you can say. But later on, when I got the response from other, we thought when we really want to reach to the masses, I mean, we have to work, or we have to go there in their own languages. So then we initiated it in Awadhi, in other regional languages of India, and not only the regional languages, but dialects also. Because I mean, until less we don't reach to the people, because in India, I mean, it's a diverse country where multiple languages are spoken. So now media literacy is in 17 languages we have initiated. Including the dialects and all. But the challenges what I'm facing is like how we can quantify such kind of effort, and what could be the role of the government. And question to Chaitanya sir, in fact, like what the government can do, and can the field publicity officers or this department can help us to carry media literacy to the masses. And when we say to the masses, I mean, in India, scenario is really very different First of all, I mean, we have to make people realize why media literacy is important and how being media illiterate could be really very harmful. So we can right now play the role of appetizer. Like,
Right.
I mean, it's a kind of creating hunger among people to become media literate. So how the either the corporates or the government or the organizations like UNESCO, UNO can help us. So this is my question.
So I think some of the so you've set us thinking now, Bhavna. So when we go back to our experts, maybe it is something that can be addressed right here. But of course, some of the questions that you raise are also rhetorical. And I don't know if there is a right or a wrong answer to that. I want to come to a completely different perspective now, a perspective that Ebru Bodur will bring to our discussion, if I may. She just has a perspective from a different country, and I would like to listen to her for just a couple of minutes. Ebru, are you there?
Hey guys, amazing conversation. So I'm just gonna make it short. So media literacy has been widely debated in Turkey since the early 2000s and has been in the curriculum of the secondary schools as an optional subject for nearly a decade, and almost 4 million students have received media literacy education. There's so many debates about media literacy that have emerged in Turkey's short but active movement to educate in the area of media literacy. So until the 2000s, there were units in some schools, subjects that included information in television, newspapers, telephones, and similar media. They were part of courses such as life sciences and social sciences. However, these topics were not taught in terms of media literacy approach. Rather, it was more like introducing these media and their place in daily life. So in 2006, Radio and Television Supreme Council, which the short version is RTUK, and Ministry of Education prepared a curriculum together, which led to a 2-hour course in media literacy as an optional subject in secondary schools. And the role of the media regulator, which is RTUK, in advancing in media literacy is, we can say that they held the most active role in progress of the media literacy movement, and RTUK took initiative for preparing the media literacy curriculum, its renewal, and providing in-service training for teachers. So all these based on the policymakers' political and social cultural approach. So the advantages of RTUK is when media literacy movement controlled by such a powerful institution, the topic has remained prominent in the national agenda for the last decade, and it was included in the official strategic documents of the state. But the disadvantages is, one of the disadvantages is protectionism has become a dominant perspective in Turkey. So the RTUK is a financially and administratively autonomous council established for organizing and auditing the radio and television sector. But we can say that they are seeing the perception of RTUK in the society is that of a watchdog, which audits and protects society from the media. And what I can say is they're also considered just focus on the traditional mass media. So I'm going to just end it asking this. So yes, when we look at the overall picture, yes, we have a curriculum. We have a conversation that even the government and official documents are involved. But what I gathered during my time as a teacher for students in secondary education and my time in the States as an educator and researcher is RTUK, the council, can't keep up with the digital era. Is this because policymakers belong to the traditional approach and are eager to hold on to it? But it is clear that the conversation we have now is an ancient story. And we mentioned collaboration earlier, and it is so important. The state do not have the skill set to approve the conversation of media literacy itself. Thank you.
Right. Well, Ebru, thank you so much for that perspective. I mean, it's that's why you're called a disruptor, because these perspectives are so different from something that we might actually think about, and that's where you came in. Thank you very much for that perspective. I think we should now finally move to what quiz masters would call the rapid round section, where in very little time, we should probably understand our speakers' perspectives on specifics of policy. Let me start with you, Belina, if I may. If you could just summarize in a minute or so, or whatever. I mean, a minute might be impractical. But what can India learn from all that you have been practicing in the US, or what you have been advocating in the US? Like, what are some of the bullet points there in that?
I think probably my strongest point would be to make sure that the people who you're expecting to train are also part of the policy, whether it's educators, whether it's community leaders, those people, because too often they're not part of the conversation and they see things from the perspective of the classroom, which is important because the classroom looks very different from somebody who's been out of the classroom for 25 years or 50 years. Same thing with communities, and one of the reasons why I focus on libraries, especially in the United States, is because every community has a library and it is free and accessible to everyone. And so therefore they see the largest scope of who is there, whether it's the aging population, people who are looking to find jobs, the teens, the children, the mothers. And I will also say, and I've been advocating for this quite a bit, I do think media literacy is important from birth. And what I mean by that is, in the United States, we have prenatal programs. I think parents, future parents, should also be given a media literacy lesson, because the first thing that happens is that they put kids in front of digital technologies without any thoughtful guidance of what that will be, or even understanding the extent of the damage they may be doing by putting them in spaces like that. So it's really important that the stakeholders are the people that matter most to growing the work that is being done on the ground.
Thank you so much, Belina. And thanks for keeping it so succinct and yet so rich in ideas. Frank, what do you think? I mean, you know a thing or two about India as well, because you do these webinars and so forth in India. So you have a kind of a dual perspective there. What is maybe one or maybe two big takeaways for you in a prospective or a potential policy in India?
I put it in the chat, but I'll also share it. In a similar forum, I suggested that media literacy advocates think like advertisers. How does the advertiser get his or her message even to the rural area? And the pandemic is a good example. How did people get official information? Media literacy educators need to follow that policy. The other thing that I would suggest, and I will keep this brief, is there is no media literacy textbook in India. And so where would advocates go? I would strongly suggest, and this is on my website, there are textbooks in Canada, there are textbooks in Australia, and there are textbooks in the United Kingdom. Well-established, excellent text about what do we teach young people, and I'm glad Belina mentioned even that at birth, what do we teach the youngest about media and media messages and their influences, and what do we want the middle grade child to know, and what do we want high school students to know? These are really good kinds of questions, and I hope that there's an effort in India to think about what could a media literacy textbook look like, even if it was not in print.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. I want to come to Syed Nazakat now. You have already mentioned actually how collaborations should happen between public and private sectors. And however, specifically, do you see the need for a national policy on media literacy?
I think certainly for a state's role in this education, actually. I think nothing scales without the state support. You can have a lot of foundations, organizations coming together, doing a little bit of work. But imagine a country, 1 billion people, you need huge resources, and you need a setup, you need a logistic support. I think state has a fundamental role to play in this, because I think there's a global agreement that the media literacy is a fundamental part of your future education for 21st century education.
Right.
I think it has to start quite early. We just finished a short pilot where we trained 120 schools across India,
Right.
and it would have not been possible without a lot of collaboration. So I think state's role is fundamental, either at the state level, because we are again a federal country, so each
state. Mm-hmm.
Is actually, for that matter, we need to have a state interventions, but certainly a national guidance about how to move forward, given the challenges we are seeing, particularly with the information which is available online.
Right. Nazakat's internet connection seems to be a little patchy, but I think we got the gist of what he was saying, and also his emphasis on the fact that media literacy should be at the pedagogical level. I mean, essentially, that was also something that he almost implied in his in what he was saying. So, Govindra Jatiraj, I want to come to you before I go to our policymaker. What form do you think a media literacy policy, if at all you think one is needed, should take? What kind of shape should it take, if at all? I mean, let's even conjecture that we might need one at all.
Right. Shashi, I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First is, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, 50% of India's population is under 25. And much of that population has only begun to access the internet recently, but critically, they were only about 15 or 16 or 17 years old a little while ago. So that's a different mind construct. Also, another important statistic to keep in mind: there are 250 million children in schools today in India. The pandemic brings a whole new dimension to what they've been able to access or not been able to access in terms of education. But let's keep that aside. A policy that addresses media literacy, I think, should go down to the basics. Let's keep aside digital delivery, let's keep aside mobile internet and everything aside for a moment, and let's ask the fundamental question about what we are trying to address. What is the most important thing that we want to teach children? At what point do we teach them about critical thinking when it comes to the way they consume information of any kind, whether delivered to them physically, verbally, on the internet, or any other place? So if we start with that, then I think the answers will come. Because India, I think, as Syed also pointed out, it's a very large country. It's very diverse. Solutions will differ. Policy direction can come nationally, but will have to be executed by states, because states are in charge of education, and therefore the way it will roll out will not be in a way that seems composite and unified in the way we would like it. So I think approaching the problem from a first principle point of view, understanding that we want to bring in the concept of critical thinking and questioning to at least each of our 250 million young students, and then going on to other people, would be the way to go, is my sense.
And therefore, it's not a revolution. It's got to be an evolution, because when you're actually addressing younger citizens, as the United States is doing, it can only gradually grow. And as we oldies are pushed out of the world, they take over with a new sense of media literacy. How optimistic is that? Thank you so much, Govind, and for your insights and for being here. And lastly, I would like to come back to our policymaker, Mr. Chaitanya Prasad. Chaitanya, you've heard this entire discussion. How does this strike you in terms of what we might need in our delivery systems, or ways forward to have a media literate, not just nation, but probably a world that's media literate?
Yeah, thank you, Shashi. And I think it was a very enriching experience listening to all the experts around the table, because everyone had a particular perspective to offer. And obviously, when you put experts around the table, it's always a learning curve for everyone, and to learn from each other as far as best practices are concerned. To begin with, at a global level, Shashi, I think the first thing that we need to do, and that's very important, is there has to be a kind of a unanimity. There has to be a kind of an agreement at a broader level globally, because communication sees no borders, right? So, for example, I mean, why I say this is that if you recall the SDGs when they were formulated and put into practice, now it was a concept which at that time would look very esoteric. It was whether it was achievable. It had a matrix of different subjects, different ideas, which was put in for universal application, right? Now, with the passage of time, if you do a quick evaluation or a dipstick as to what exactly has happened, I think there has hardly been any country in the world which has not put the SDGs into practice.
Right.
That's very, very critical. I mean, the SDGs formulate a part of the policy framework for any country in the world and in different verticals. So that's one. Why I say this is, when you talk about media literacy, and if you look at a global acceptance or a global outreach of the whole idea, it would not be a bad suggestion if you would come out with a media literacy template that would be applicable step by step with a certain set of deliverables which would be applicable to all countries. And that would be a way by which the best practices could be learned, unlearned by different segments that are responsible for taking the whole agenda of media literacy forward. I know for sure that UNESCO, etc., and related organizations do talk about it, but what you need to do is this echo effect of this idea needs to be, go across different forums, different identities, etc. So that is one way, that's one suggestion. For example, in the 70s, you had the idea of a new world information order. Now, the new world information order was trying to establish continuity with change. So similarly, if you're talking about media literacy, perhaps the practices by which concepts and ideas have been put into a universal implementation, that is one. Now, coming back to India, a lot of people have talked about the implementation at the national level. I think, very honestly speaking, the government, you see, as diverse India is, and a lot of people are there to understand as to how we take things forward. At a policy level, it becomes very complex. And as people have admitted, India is diverse and there are different languages, different regions, etc., and everyone's sensitivity, etc. All that has to be taken into account. And what has happened is, and why I say this is unfortunately due to the lockdown or the coronavirus that has set in India also, schools have been closed, right? Now, if schools have been closed, children have been studying online for God knows how many months. Now, that has been, again, a kind of a learning curve to understand how education is imparted. And obviously, most of these kids, I know for sure with a lot of my colleagues, children have had a tough time being attentive as far as class is concerned. So the kind of integration with technological application, it is unbelievable. You can't ask a class of 5 or 6 years old guys, boy or girl, sitting down with an information tablet and trying to integrate information apart from the video games, etc. So coming to it, what I'm trying to say essentially is that this is an initiative which will, and I'm sure it is being taken forward. And one reason why I say this is just a suggestion over here. I'm just a kind of an information. The budget that was recently on the 1st of February, many of you would have heard the budget speech of the Honorable Finance Minister talking about setting up 200 educational channels, right? Now, the details of that are being worked out. Now, that is a wonderful forum or a platform by which this whole concept of media literacy can go to the last mile, you see. That is something that can definitely take place. I remember Bhavna asking me a question, and that's why, Shashi, I'll take one more minute.
Please.
She talks about, government taking the message across to people in rural areas, etc. This is done by organizations which we call as regional outreach bureaus or the Bureau of Outreach Communication. Basically, they try to take information to the media dark areas where you do not get television or, it's impossible to reach to the people. And this is absolutely the areas which are absolutely inaccessible as far as information, etc., dissemination is concerned. And let me tell you, those two organizations at the national as well as the regional level are doing a wonderful job in taking this whole process forward. right, to ensure that the people get the right information, especially with regard to policy initiatives, etc., of the government. And finally, if I may end so, as far as this whole venture is concerned, and I said right at the very beginning, Jashi, this has to be collaborative. It's very, very important. It cannot and should not be the government alone. And there's a lot of good stuff happening across the country by the state governments or by civil society or by individuals. All those aspects, and even say the organization of this conference, the good elements that are coming into play today to understand as to how this whole process needs to be taken forward. There is no reason why it cannot succeed. And let me tell you before I end, this young population in India, or the youth, or the Gen Next, as I may call it, are far more smarter than what we may realize. The power to absorb information is something that you have to see to believe. I have, and why I say this is I have young colleagues who work with us. The depth of knowledge, the focus of presentation, the vision of implementation, we are no patch to them. So they just need a bit of hand holding to take this whole process forward, right? And finally, media has always been partners in progress, and there is no reason why media cannot supplement this wonderful initiative to be taken over forward as far as different stakeholders are concerned. Thank you very much, Sashi, and a pleasure to be here with all the panelists.
Thank you so much, Chaitanya. First of all, for your great insights, as usual. I mean, this time also I ended up taking a lot of notes, but also spending all the 2 hours, it's well past everybody's bedtime. And I know that you've had a long, tiring day as well. So thank you very much for your time. I would also like to now conclude with what my thoughts were. In fact, they kind of segues out of what Chaitanya was just saying. Are we assuming illiteracy when we say media literacy? Are we are we over invested in misinformation and ignoring certain other aspects, such as a lot of us know about hate speech and what it is doing? Is media literacy being able to crack that? What about media production itself? How media production can actually impact or hamper media literacy efforts just merely by doing its job? Because as much as media visibilizes events and communities and artifacts, it also invisibilizes a lot, and therefore media literacy now at this policy level, as well as definitely the conceptual level, needs to go a little deeper. Do we recognize belief as truth? Kind of, have we been adaptive enough to understand how belief works and how solidarity with belief is more important probably than the assumption of illiteracy? Do people, are social media, for example, making people believe they know a lot while they might not know that much? Do they know more about formats than about content? That kind of thing. And finally, is media literacy making the right balance between prescriptions of responsibility and a provision of agency and empowerment? And that, I think, is going to be the key to any policymaking efforts, or certainly, as Chaitanya was saying, in terms of how media literacy proponents, such as Bellina's organization, for example, might think of setting this template, not necessarily on lines of what UNESCO says or whatever, but in terms of actual practical ground level realities, and to work with communities. With that, I would like to end whatever I'm saying, hand it back to Karen.
Great. Thank you very much, Sashi, and everyone. I think that was really, really amazing. And it's really, I don't know what word would you want to use, but when Chaitanya ended in his beginning speech, he said, use the word challenges, which is exactly where we wanted to take off. And he ended with SDGs, which is exactly what we want to show you right now. But before we just show you that last thing that we want to share with you, I just want to say that, we ourselves did a summit with the Nobel Foundation based on the Nobel prize, which was called the Nobel Prize Teachers Summit. And it was really an experience, and the kind of material that they showed us. So I've shared the link over there. I would definitely, request if you could find some time to go through that. The kind of material, Nobel laureates and amazing people, which we had on that particular event, and the material that they have designed and created for every single aspect for teachers, especially. I would say, please just have a look at that. It's just unbelievable. And I will end with that part of it in terms of the content, and close with saying that, the whole reason of the Rise World Summit is to talk about the SDGs incidentally, and SDGs as a whole, right? So most of us look at this as 17 blocks or 17 silos. And while focus is really, really great, as what we look at it as a woolen ball with 17 colors, all tightly entwined into one and interlinked. So I think, just as Chaitanya said, I think every single thing we design or do has an impact across all of these. And so I would urge you, I would request you, please keep these in mind, because truly it's the canvas for any kind of development story, right? And therefore, media literacy itself also will impact each one of these things. So please do think about it.